Welcome back. Session two, this second keynote kind of time. We're going to dig into a lot of best practices and leading people to generosity. So let me make sure I'm in the right place. Yep. So we'll be talking about leading people to generosity. And best practices, and I know several questions came in early. I'll go ahead and do a couple, and then we'll move on. Have a question: does it help to change the name of the general fund to something like the core ministry fund or something else? I think that's up to your creativity and your ability to share. I think just changing the name of the fund doesn't solve the problem of people looking at things as overhead or paying the bills. That culture shift happens in the telling of the outcome stories. And so I think we can change to where people feel like the annual fund or the operations account or whatever feels better. But so just changing the name of the fund doesn't fix it. Telling the stories does. And then if you come up with a creative name, I'd be all over that. And if you do, send me what that is so that I can share it across the world. I'd be happy to. I'd be happy to do that. We do have people in the United States who are generous, who have an issue with the concept of pledging. We have people who are consistent givers. They give every year, give regularly, but they won't fill out a pledge card. Some of this has to do with just how they grew up and what their parents told them. And so they're kind of, I sometimes say, sometimes for people, their parents taught them not to share a pledge and they don't, and it's probably the only thing that they're still listening to their parents about. But there's two things with this. Like, I don't want to die on the sword of getting a card back at the expense of a relationship with the person. But at the same time, I would like to explore with the person what's up with that. And this takes a relationship. This takes getting to know people. And this isn't, a place for a bulk email to the congregation or a bulk letter, but it's a conversation with folks. Why won't you fill out a pledge card? And most of the time what we see is people have excuses for that, but not really reasons. There's a difference between reasons and excuses. Those same people who won't pledge to the church, they got married and they pledged to their spouse. They're willing to take out a mortgage or a car loan. They pledge to a bank, but they won't pledge to God. And so it's important to explore that with people and find out kind of what's going on there. And I've challenged people, I know you don't think you like it, but will you try it? And, even to the points where I'll get people on council who really don't want to do it and tell people that they didn't want to do it, but they're going to try it and they're going to see how it goes. So I think that's an exploration where somebody's on their generosity journey and it's a place to be in their lives and to walk with them. Question about, in some congregations, stewardship's a dirty word for some reason. What about abundance team? I think you are free to explore better ways to talk about this activity. Newer people to a church don't even know what stewardship is necessarily. I personally like the term. That's why my main character in my animated short is Stu. Abundance team, generosity team, I think work. I know some people call it the resource team. I think all of that is good. If you don't have a team, I suggest you get one. I think Jesse mentioned oftentimes financial people are not the best people for a stewardship team. Financially minded people often see the scarcity, often see the limits. You want some dreamers, but more than that, I want storytellers. I want people that can interpret what God's up to and share that with the congregation. Those are the first people that I want on a stewardship team. We have a couple of programs where, we take care of developing a lot of the material for you. You just need people to interpret that material and interpret your local story to the congregation. And so if you stock the team with all financially minded people, your giving is probably going to feel very transactional, and we want to move it to more of an investment in ministry and that sort of thing. So, a lot of times what we find is the team that somebody is working with when they come to us is not the team that's working with them a year or two down the road. Jesse was a strong example of that. Are audits important in telling the story? Likely audits are only important in telling your story if there has been a case of malfeasance or other impropriety, or where people don't trust the organization. Trust is very important. If an audit is helpful in building that trust, then you may need one, but it's a piece of trust building. Are the animated videos available to be used? I am happy to make I guess it was the first one you saw, Stew in a Pandemic. I haven't talked to him yet about this, but I'm going to see if we can make that available to you as being part of this conference. The series that Stu is in is something that we invite our clients and people working with us to have access to. And for those of you on this that are a client and working with me already and are wondering why you didn't get it, we produced those on Monday and Tuesday of this week, and so they are fresh off the press. We've got about 14 Stu videos in some form of production or another. So, but again, Stew in a Pandemic is available to you, and you can use that in your online worship or however else you would find useful. So thanks for hanging in with us, and yes, we will make Stew available to you. I think I cleared the questions, and so we can move into the afternoon session. Please keep the questions coming. I don't get a lot of interaction with you in the format in which we're delivering this, and questions make me feel like you're paying attention and you're with me. And so thanks for sending those in, and we'll be giving some more throughout the day. So let's move into this next session. So the current reality of giving in America, and I guess I should give credit where credit is due. These next three slides that I share all come directly from a book called Passing the Plate, which it's a little old now. I think it might have come out 2005 or so, but I find the situation still to be incredibly accurate with where we are. Passing the Plate was a sociological study of giving. And I have to be honest with you, it really changed my life as I read this study. Chapter 1 is a listing of, and I mentioned earlier, I'm not a big proponent for pushing tithing on people because I just think it's too hard for so many. But chapter 1 goes through what the church in the United States could accomplish if all of our members tithe 10% of their income. So they figured out what Protestants made and what they could then give, and they listed, and it's like 8 pages of this many hundreds of $1 million for supporting the education of future church leaders, this many hundreds of millions to send kids to camp, this many hundreds of millions in order to feed people. And it goes on and on and on. And the first time I read it, I thought it meant that we could do this or we could do this. And what I discovered is that we could do this and do this and do this and do this. And it's just amazing what the world can accomplish if we were more generous, what the church could do for an impact if we were more generous. So Passing the Plate, sociological study of giving. Here's some of the things they discovered. They discovered that the median Protestant, as far as percentage of income they give away, is giving less than 1%, 0.62%. The median, by the way, is if you lined us up by giving percentage, smallest to largest, the median would be the person in the middle. Oftentimes we hear this, that Protestants give away 2% or 2.1%. And that's true on average, but I use the median to show just how many of us are giving such a little percentage of income. And it is this statistic itself, for the reason that I'm really not in favor of utilizing tithing 10% just as an across-the-board, tactic for increasing stewardship. Because if you're currently at the median level and you are all of a sudden asked to increase your giving by 9.38% to get to 10%, you're just going to shut down. Like, that is not a realistic jump for people to make. And that's why I just stress the generosity journey concept, that all of us are on a generosity journey, even as we reach 10% or beyond. I was mentored by a person in my first call. She and her husband got to the point where they were giving 38% of their income away. When they first graduated seminary and were in a first call, couldn't afford to tithe 10%. So they covenanted to grow by 1% a year and just never quit. And when her husband died, they were giving 38% of their income away. That to me is the generosity journey. That is something we can strive for. The largest category of donors in most congregations, nearly 50% in the majority of congregations, give less than $5 a week. And in most congregations, this has nothing to do with their wealth. It has everything to do with where they are on a generosity journey. These people, for the most part, I am not making statements on everybody's wealth situation. For the most part, these people can afford to double and triple and quadruple their giving. It's not a financial issue. It's an interest issue. It's a commitment issue. It's part of their spiritual journey. And by the way, so I don't like to ever ask or to say to a congregation, hey, if everybody would grow by 10%, we'd be doing great. That's not fair, because if you're currently giving $5 a week, I really don't want you to start giving $5.50 a week. All right. At the same time, if you're currently giving it, $500 a week, it's probably not fair to ask you to go to $550 a week. So the smaller percentage that you're giving, normally the larger percentage increase I'm going to ask you for. And in those categories, I'm often asking for doubling or tripling or inviting those people to grow by $1 a day, which in many cases causes them to double or triple their giving. So don't ever ask we need to treat people as people. Not everybody is the same. And so it's okay to differentiate and segment our lists and ask for different things. It's not fair to ask everybody to simply grow by the same amount, because for some people that's easy. For some people that's really hard. And by the way, we don't ever want to say, hey, if everybody would just give $100, when we have a special appeal kind of thing, that's not fair either, because $100 for me might be pretty easy, but it's pretty hard for somebody else, and it's really easy for someone else. So again, people are people. It's okay to treat them differently. We don't ever treat anybody better than anyone else, but it's okay to treat people different. We find in the church that a lot of people don't have a good, solid theological or biblical basis for giving. And this is even true among our leaders. That if I ask people to describe where do you go biblically for your understanding of stewardship, occasionally we'll get some tithing language. Sometimes we get some abundance language, but more often we kind of get nothing. It's a place where we need to develop ourselves. I personally like to go to Matthew 6:21, where Jesus says, where your treasure is, your heart will be also. The abundance stories that we've talked about. Theologically, the first article of the Apostles' Creed is a great way to go. Martin Luther's explanation of that, of everything I have is a gift of God. In one translation, even our cattle. I love to think that I think I have an inner farmer in me that kind of likes the long list of things that Luther says God provides us. And I think tying into the creation, and I think people understand that story and know that story, and it's a place we can lead people. When it's just the legalistic tithing, I think we lose people. But I like to think of it as a matter of the heart. Jesus says, where your treasure is, your heart will be also. I want people on a generosity journey, not so we get more money for the church. I want people on that generosity journey so that we get people's hearts more aligned with the church. If the median Protestant's giving 0.62%, and Jesus is right that where your treasure is, your heart will be also, then I would say part of our issue is getting more of people's hearts engaged in the lives of our church. And the stewardship function can really align with that. And I think the way to make me angry is for people to say, oh, here's the stewardship guy, it's time to pay the bills. Stewardship has, in my opinion, very little to do with paying the bills. Stewardship has very much to do with implementing the mission of the church, for making an impact for the kingdom of God, for expanding the mission, for expanding what we're able to accomplish, and inviting people into being part of that. That it's a shared journey. It's what we do together. It's not the paying of bills. And I talked in the earlier session about, it's not overhead. It's the ministry of the church. A question did just pop up. How do you get told the stories about people growing to 38%? I think you ask for them. I think when we're having conversations with people, one of the things we need to talk about is, how did you learn to give? And how are you learning to be more generous? It's a great question to give to your leaders, to give to your stewardship team, and to even have in your one-on-one pastoral care conversations as you're getting to know people better. And then the key to that too is to know your own story. What are your fears of money? How did you grow up with money? Are you afraid of it? Or are you worried about talking to a wealthy person? Or are you comfortable enough with money to be able to have a conversation that it's a struggle? And I find people are much more willing to talk to you when you've shared your struggle. I don't think it's helpful to most people to hear, oh, I tithe, I give 10%, and that's how I decide what to give. Because that doesn't represent the struggle it is to do first fruits giving or to do generosity. I think people relate to the struggle. Pastor Meredith, who you heard from earlier, I know she's done some great sharing with her congregation of the struggle for her own family to be more generous. And I think that's the way she's stimulated a lot more people, especially in her own demographic, to join her in that generosity journey. So great question. The Passing the Plate also discovered there's really little accountability in our congregations around giving. In so many congregations, pastors don't, and maybe aren't allowed to know or don't want to know what people give. And therefore, we have these places where we celebrate that the financial secretary is the only person who knows what people give, which, by the way, if you celebrate that, you need to be careful, because generally accepted accounting procedures don't like for only one person to know the revenue stream of an organization. It allows for too many opportunities for malfeasance. But what the secrecy mindset, by the way, I believe highly in confidentiality, but there's a very big difference between confidentiality and secrecy. And so I believe pastors are capable of confidential information. I believe some people on the stewardship committee are very capable of confidential information. I don't believe in secrecy in the church. I think that leads to problems and issues. But we don't have accountability when nobody knows or nobody says anything. So one of my favorite tactics, by the way, is for when the first quarter statements come out, for the pastor just to sign the first one that says, thank you for your giving last year. And in this first quarter, and it's live signature, blue ink, so people know you signed it. It just kind of takes some of the mystique over it. Well, I'm hoping we'll talk a little bit more about the secrecy issue. And there's a question up, are there courses available to help people talk about their fears and issues with money? We do one for pastors who need that. You can reach out to me about that. We also have, that we offer as we work with folks, generosity story conversation starters. I've written some curriculum for small groups that help people explore their history with money and what that is for them. So feel free to reach out for me on those kinds of things as well. Again, we talked a little bit about before, the congregations wait to see what money's available instead of having a vision for what you're going to do with that. We're going to talk about that more in just a little bit. And again, here's the thing about the overhead idea. We don't articulate the value of worship and faith and care and those sorts of things. And then an interesting thing for me to see, as I used to represent raising money for an institution, and now I help a lot of synods and other things. What Passing the Plate discovered is that about 97% of gifts stay local in a congregation, that they stay within the walls of that congregation, that they're not out in the community, out in the larger world making a bigger impact. And when that happens, that all the money stays local. People don't see a larger vision of what to give to. Your people are giving to those other organizations because the church isn't doing it. So there is a myth that people are giving all they can. They're not. They're giving elsewhere as well in order to get that outside the church sort of mentality. Question of what does that individual accountability for giving look like? Well, it looks like noticing when a family that's been giving $100 a week for 16 years all of a sudden stops giving. You make a phone call to check in on them, not to ask them for their money, but to find out what's going on because they've broken a pattern. If somebody hasn't grown their giving, in 3 years and they're your council president, to have a one-on-one conversation with, talk to me about your generosity because we need to lead this congregation to more generosity. And it looks like on paper you're not growing, but perhaps you are. Help me know your story. So it's not, accountability isn't confrontation, but it's having a relationship. You can't have accountability without relationship first. So you've got to build those solid relationships. And then from there, you can enter a person's life and engage and see where they are. It's also calling somebody and saying, hey, you gave $25 a week for the last 13 years, and all of a sudden you gave $5,000 last week. What's going on? So part of that accountability is also getting the chance to celebrate with people. And sometimes it's as simple as signing the acknowledgement letter so that people know that somebody is watching and somebody is looking. And actually, I'm going to stop on that there because I've got a video coming up that's going to address a little bit of this as well. Sometimes we accidentally stifle generosity. We give the box score. Last week we had this much revenue. We needed to have this much revenue. We're this far short. I have congregations that insist on keeping that. And so instead of losing, I tell them it's okay to keep it, but wrap it in the midst of a story. Because if you just put the box score, then you're reinforcing the idea that this is a financial transaction. Wrap it into a story so that people recognize that their giving is about ministry outcomes and, we might need a little bit more. And by the way, the box score usually lies because 30% of giving in America will happen between Thanksgiving Day and the end of the year. And normally our box score assumes that we get 1/12 of our money each month. And that's simply not true. We treat everyone the same. I've started to talk a little bit about this, but when we get up and just do blanket things like if everybody would grow by 10%, we're not treating people from where they are and where they can go. I would never advocate treating anybody, no matter their giving history, better than anyone else. But I think we have to, treat people differently. I remember when I was still at Novus Way, one year I think we probably had 27 different segments for our end of year letter. That might have been a little bit more differentiation than we needed. But we gave that level of personalization and differentiation. By the way, don't ever say good news, folks. We kept the budget flat. That's not good news for people that want your organization to be making an impact, making a difference in the world. And don't make excuses for people to cut back. Don't say, hey, we know you're on a fixed income and so you can't give anymore. I've learned over and over again, it's not our place to say no for anybody. It's our place to give a vision of what we can do and provide an invitation for people to grow in generosity for that. It's up to God and them to take care of what happens then. All right. I do have a story. I won't go into it today because I do want to get through this session of a person on a fixed income, retired, who doubled their giving to their church in a 6-year period of time. All right, so the myth of being on a fixed income and being able to grow in generosity is simply a myth. When we don't mentor generosity and we just stay fully quiet on matters of giving and don't witness to that generosity, people aren't going to grow as well. And then we also have a lot of churches that have too much money in savings with money that doesn't have a name on it. So I don't mind a congregation having 2 months worth of expenses on reserve as an emergency fund. I don't mind a congregation having $40,000 in a savings account because that's going to be the money to replace the HVAC unit when it goes. I don't mind money in a congregation if it's got a name to what it's going to accomplish. What I don't like is having a big pot of money that sits there with no purpose. because I've kind of rediscovered something that I learned a few years back. But as churches, we are nonprofit organizations, and we need to embrace that. We need to fully live into our nonprofit identity. That at the end of the year, we deploy the money that we've been entrusted with to make a difference for the kingdom of God. We are not called upon to be savers and to have it aside. Again, we need to take care of our places. We need to, make sure that we can operate. But we don't need to live the fear in the way in which we hold on to money. And I'm going to talk about that fear in just a minute. Accountability conversation. I have a question up on the board. Do accountability conversations always have to be the pastor? No. Accountability conversations need to be the people who are trusted with generosity in the congregation and can have those conversations. So it doesn't have to be the pastor, but they need to be people who are trained, they need to be people who are trained to have these conversations, who have a good personal understanding of their own relationship with money, that can lead these conversations. So no, all these conversations don't have to be the pastor. They need to be trusted individuals that can have these conversations. So thanks for that question. I mentioned a moment ago the fear. We don't need to be congregations that model fear of tomorrow. Matthew 6:25 and following talks about don't worry about tomorrow. Tomorrow has fears of its own. And a lot of our congregations model fear of the future. Fear that people will all of a sudden all stop giving. Fear that we won't be able to operate. Fear that the world's coming down. I see this too in congregations that have endowments, where the endowment will only distribute 2% of their corpus or their money. Where if you're a public foundation, you'd be required to give 5%, but people worry that, well, the fund might go down in value, or our investments haven't gone up as much as we had hoped. I fully believe that God would be happy for you to run out of money in your endowment because you were faithfully living through downtimes and supporting people in bad economies. So, and the reason I care so passionately about this fear idea is so many people sitting in our congregations are fearful about tomorrow. I feel it across generations. There are people in every segment of life that are worried about tomorrow. And I think this fear is paralyzing us to live the abundant life that Jesus talks about. That we can experience abundant life if we're captured in fear. I'll kind of close this with just a quick story. A pastor friend of mine up in Southeast Michigan, not the greatest economy of our country, got a phone call during the pandemic from an older member of the congregation who said, Pastor, I want to drop by the church. Can you meet me in the parking lot in about 15 minutes? I have something for you. And so the pastor greeted him, and the man handed over an envelope that included 2 checks. Both checks were for $2,000. And he said, I had to write them as 2 separate checks because the first one is the offering that I should have given last year, but I was too afraid to give up the money. And the second check is my offering for this year, because as we're living in the midst of this pandemic, I see that I'm actually being well taken care of, and I'm going to be fine, and I need to stop worrying about tomorrow. And the spiritual discipline of writing both checks reminded of the way the fear paralyzed the year before, but was going to be freed from this year by being generous that way. Which, by the way, led to a generosity story to be shared with the congregation. So just so you kind of relating back to that last session that we had. So very good. We've got a video now. It's a video from a real live donor, and this real live donor may or may not be in this meeting today. So, but Tom and I sat down for about a 30-minute conversation. Fear not, I have edited that down to about 5 minutes. And there are a number of really important points about being just a donor to a congregation. Tom also has a relationship with Southern Seminary. He's on the board for Novus Way, a strong relationship with the Florida Bahamas Synod. and makes a number of really good points. I invite you, if you want to, use the chat box to just kind of shout them out. I think the way I've put the video together kind of helps you see some of them as well. But feel free to be interactive a little bit with one another as this video happens. And I'm tremendously grateful that Tom would allow me to share this video with you from the eyes of a donor. So let's move to the video now if we can. So Tom, thanks for spending some time with me today. And I look forward to having a little bit of conversation around giving and the church and other institutions. Can you share with us why it is you give to church-related organizations in addition to giving to your local congregation?
So there's two parts to this question I think that are very important. One is as a member of the leadership team or oversight committee, I think it's very important that whoever is going out and doing the fundraising can say, our leadership team is completely and totally behind this and has supported it. So that's one reason that I give, but I wouldn't be on the board if I didn't have a vision and haven't been spoken to about what their cause and purpose is. And I think that's even more important for me to want to give to them, is that I see something that has a cause or a vision or an ability to be able to get God's message out better. I've seen it done well across the board, and I've also seen areas for opportunities.
Okay.
The personal letter or a phone call has always meant a great deal to me. And, you know, a thank you and your belief in the ministry that sometimes is outside of the church that I attend. And I think we really miss out on not doing thank yous the way that we need to, and acknowledging people, not so much publicly, but acknowledging them for their faithfulness in what they're sharing. And it also kind of plays into the ask too, because as you're acknowledging it, it creates an environment to want to give more and be a part of it.
Who is, in your opinion, the most appropriate person for that acknowledgement to come from?
Well, I think it can come from the pastor, or it can come from one of the lay leaders.
Okay.
But I think it's dependent upon what the message is, more so than who the messenger is. Also, I think even a step beyond the thank you note, but it's also on how our mission is being fulfilled because of the faithfulness of the people. So whether it's pictures, whether it's this is part of what we had hoped to be able to accomplish, these are the number of lives that we were able to touch because of the faithfulness of the people that gave to this. That just all plays into the vision and mission, I think, of what we're trying to create in that excitement of motivating people to give. This is the one where you should distort my voice and not be able to see the clear picture, because I don't know if I want this out there or not. Of course, I could give more to my congregation. And they haven't motivated me to give more. They've not updated me. And even though I've had conversations with them, I still get letters that say, we're in the process of building the budget, and we need to know what you're going to give to build the budget so we know what we can afford to do next year. There's not motivation in that. I'm not seeing the cause. I'm not seeing and so I'm faithful with my tithe, but my ability to be able to do a matching gift or to help in other ways, it's just not there as far as motivating me. There's a number of times that finance people have stood up and kind of given the gloom and doom pitch over the course of my career. And there's also been times that, and it goes back to the motivation part, where we had the 3 temple talks set up, and the first 2 went across very, very well in the Stewardship for All Seasons. And the third one was about the budget. Anything else that you think we ought to share with roster leaders before we end our time here today? I go back to the book from Henry Nouwen on abundance and giving. And we can't lose track of what the joy of giving back what we have been so blessed with, whether it's the widow's mite or whether it's the successful business person. There's no difference in God's eyes, but there is a joy in being able to give that. People want to feel a part of something right now, and there's no better time to respond to this right now in a world right now that sees not a lot of joy. And we can not only grow our ministries and continue to tell the wonderful story of what we've been given, but we can also bring joy to people by allowing them to be able to give.
So I am so thankful for Tom for sharing those insights, and I hope you found that valuable to hear directly from a donor who is a member of a congregation. I think the conversation I just had with Tom in that video is a conversation you can have with people in your congregation as well, to kind of learn about what motivates them, what's helpful to them. And, I certainly, found it cute in wanting his face to be, muffled, where we talked about, can you give more? But the reality is most of our donors can. There are a few people in our congregations who are literally giving all they can. That's a very small percentage of people. Most people can afford to give more. We just need to motivate them better for that investment. And then I love there at the end, in talking about the joy of giving, that what we need to recognize for people is that there is great joy in giving. I knew I had a donor who had was very good in business, but who basically said, I'm good at my job, but what makes my job worthwhile is that I can take the money I earn and invest it in your ministry, and it can make such a difference in people's lives. There was joy in that. And when we're telling our stories well, I think we've got the best stories. We just kind of hide them behind some poor announcements a lot of the time. People want to be connected to what God is up to on our ministries. We just need to discover that story and share it with people so they find that joy in giving in the midst of their life as a congregation as we have it. So again, I'm delighted we had that conversation. I hope that time and insight was valuable for you. So abundance, the definition I give abundance in my book is recognizing the one who provides us everything, and recognizing that it's not only enough, but it's enough to share. And this ties directly to Jesus's understanding of, promising that he came that we might have life and have it abundantly. And there's Meredith shared some abundance stories there. One of my favorites ever, we used to publish in the newsletter all the things that the camps needed. It was our needs list. We even called it that. It was our needs list. And I once got a phone call from a gentleman I'd gotten to know, lived alone, for health reasons, unable to actually attend worship in person. But back when I knew him, we could have visits one-on-one. And he called me one day and he said, I got the newsletter and I see your needs list. And I was like, oh, great. And he said, I can cover that. I was like, what do you mean you can cover that? He said, yes, I've looked at your list and I think I can do it all. Is it okay if the van is used? And I said, we're a camp. Of course the van can be used. We don't need a new van. Whatever used van you gave us would certainly be an improvement over what we have. So he called me a couple days later and he said, the van's got 38 on it. Is that okay? And I was like, oh man, that'll be fantastic. He said, I can drive it up Thursday along with everything on your list and bring it to you. I said, what time will you be there? I'll greet you. We'll have lunch. And I get to say thank you in person. So I see him pull up and the van looked awfully shiny. and I was like, that's an awfully shiny van for a van with 38,000 miles on it. And I looked at the odometer when he handed me the keys. And at that point, it had like 338 miles on it. It had 38 actual miles on it. He had not only bought us a brand new van, but everything that was on our needs list. And the joy on his face to do that, and the realization for me in that moment of what abundance is out there when people are compelled to the story and see what the needs are and seek to meet those needs. If you need any more on abundance, just rewatch Pastor Tiffany's study on that as well, because she certainly got it there too. And again, giving is a matter of the heart. I ground stewardship biblically in Matthew 6:21. For where your treasure is, your heart will be also. I will confess, I about made it all the way through seminary, thinking it was where your heart is, your treasure naturally follows behind. Mark Allen Powell was my advisor for a year at Trinity Seminary. He's got a great book called Giving to God, where he fully explores the whole concept of giving being a matter of the heart. And I think as pastors, as deacons, leaders in this church, as we recognize that giving is a matter of the heart and not a matter of the paying of the bills, then we can explore and address stewardship issues in a very different way. So the keys to a culture of generosity, what needs to be present in order for that culture of generosity to come into being? We look at this, we have what we call the 10 steps to success for nonprofits and churches. These are the first 3 steps. It's leadership, it's your stewardship or fundraising program, and it's a strategic plan. It is these 3 things that I develop in my book, which, by the way, it was available to you at a discount for the conference. And there is a discount available for those of you that want to use it for congregation study and buy 15 or more. That code was sent to you, and we can send it again if you need it. But at fortresspress.com, Ward 30 will get you 30% off the book if you order 15 copies or more for congregational study. I explore in there leadership, stewardship, and strategic plan. Leadership is both staff leadership as well as council leadership. Integrity, probably the most important piece of all that. But leadership has to be growing in generosity as well. Notice I didn't say they all have to be growing in dollars given. Sometimes growth in generosity actually means you give less money. If your spouse passes away, you can grow in generosity, but the overall dollars you give might go down a lot. If you lose your job or become underemployed, the overall dollars you give will probably decrease and probably should decrease, but you can still grow in generosity. And so leaders have to be people growing in generosity. Sometimes I hear from pastors, do I have to give to my church since I'm also employed by my church? And I said, I don't know that you have to, but I sure hope that you're leading the organization in a way in which you want to give to your church, because it's making such a dramatic impact on people's lives, that you have a vision for the future of where you're going that compels you to want to be generous in your church. So it's across the board that we need to be growing in generosity. And I do find that as board members or staff members are not growing in generosity, the whole stewardship generosity function is going to struggle. It takes leadership. There's more to that than we may have time for, but I'm happy to take your questions on that. Then we need to develop a stewardship program. And we need to develop a stewardship program that isn't asking about the bills. We need to develop a stewardship program that does these 4 things. We need to inform, we need to motivate, we need to ask, and we need to thank. Okay? I don't believe in cookie cutter programs, but I believe that we have to do these 4 things. I can't motivate your congregation. Only your people can motivate your people to the vision you're about, to the generosity stories of those that are there. So we need to inform, we need to motivate, we need to ask, and we need to thank. And if we miss on any of these 4, we're going to leave people wanting more. The one we often miss the most is that motivation piece. And again, the first keynote was about outcome stories and getting the motivation in front of people all year. But when we go from informing to asking without motivating, people think we just wanted their money. Motivation is what helps people feel like it's an investment in something bigger than themselves, something that's going to make a difference. So failure to motivate leads people to thinking we just wanted their money. Failure to ask leads to shame and guilt. Okay? So asking is probably the part of stewardship that scares us the most. But it's in the failure to ask that people feel like they don't have enough, like they're not asking or that they're not giving enough. Words I hate to hear at the end of a stewardship appeal: I wish I could give more. I don't want anybody to wish they could give more. I want everyone to feel that the gift they just made is a great gift for them, but that doesn't happen if we don't ask for it. That's why oftentimes I'll ask people to grow by $1 a day. I don't ask everybody to grow by $1 a day because for some people that's too hard. For some people that's too easy. But a lot of people can relate to $1 a day. And that begins a generosity journey. So failure to ask will actually lead to shame. I know I had a person after a workshop I led once share with me that she used to skip worship in the month of October because the stewardship appeal made her feel too guilty. She wouldn't serve on congregation council because she felt like she wasn't doing enough. But she said to me, I can grow by $1 a day. And in fact, I can grow by more than $1 a day. And I'll do that this year, and I'll feel like I'm doing my part. And so we've got to make sure that we ask as well. And then saying thank you is just good gratitude. And Tom mentioned that a little bit in what he shared with you too. I'm not going to go further on that. And then we need to be working from a strategic plan, or you can call it a strategic ministry vision. And I know this is hard for some people to think about. People feel like, well, a strategic plan, that's a businessy term. We're going to act too much like a business if we do that. Strategic plans have two parts. Strategic plans have the identity part, and then they have the action plan because of the identity. If the identity is correct, if your mission, your vision, your core values are fully in alignment with who you are as a church, then you have no risk of becoming a business, because you won't set yourself up as a business because your mission will be something different. We find a lot of mission statements that actually don't say anything. We see a lot of core values that could actually be any congregation. We see a lot more core values that are more aspirational than actual. This identity piece is critical because we don't want to start action planning until we really know who we are and what it is we're seeking to accomplish. And it's when we have this that we can then invite people in to funding a goal instead of a tactic. Too often in the church, we're inviting people to fund tactics. We need a youth pastor. We need to refurbish the bathroom. We need to, call a second pastor. Those are all tactics. What donors actually want to fund are goals. When you have a building campaign and the gifts stop after the building is up, the reason for that is that the building itself was seen as the goal, where in actuality it should have been the tactic. The purpose of the building should be that fellowship can be so strong that we build the community that we envision. People would rather give to that actually than a building. People would rather give to a goal that all the children who grow up in this congregation will have a faith that sustains them through life, instead of giving money for a children's ministry person. They want the children's ministry person in order to accomplish the goal. And so we need to put those goals out in front of people. So the fundraising will happen a lot better when we work from that kind of a strategy. So then we need to be modeling generosity. Actually, I need to back up a second. I'm going to get to that in just a minute. So these are the keys to a culture of generosity. Neil, we've got a poll coming up, number 3, that I'll ask for here in just a second. So I want to see if those 3 things, leadership, your stewardship effort, or the strategic plan, which do you think is the priority in your congregation? So take just a moment and answer my poll question for me, if you would. How we doing? Okay. Did you close the poll? Can I see it or not? Or what won?
31, 34, 34.
Oh, wow. Y'all are just about evenly distributed. So thanks for that. But we dig in where you think it's your number one thing to work on and begin working on it. In leadership, oftentimes we get lucky with the council members we have. I think we need to do more than get lucky. We need to invest in them. I know I've heard college presidents talk about spending, 10 and 20% of their time investing in the leaders. Stewardship program, certainly we can help with that, but find the resources you need to develop the stewardship program. Strategic planning. By the way, a quick word on strategic planning. It should only take 6 months to develop a good strategic plan. I've heard of people spending a year and a half or longer on a strategic plan. If it does, your mission has become planning and is not living out what you're supposed to be. 6 months is plenty of time to develop a really good strategic planning. And by the way, in the midst of a pandemic, I find to be a great time to do planning. The joy in people to vision a future is just fun to watch during this time that we're living in. So don't feel like you can't be doing that right now. I'm going to do a little bit more and then come back to questions. And so I do see that we have a number of questions. Keep them coming. We'll get to them. We've got another question time after this session too if we need it. So modeling generosity. Give people samples of what they can do, growing by $1 a day. I know a person who they doubled their giving 1 month in the year, and it came about in the pandemic. They said, you know what? Right now I'm doing pretty good. I'm still employed. My spouse is still employed. So today we're going to double our giving. I don't know what I can do next, but right now I can double giving 1 month this year. I had a council president hear that story, who then decided to do that herself and shared that with the congregation, and a few other people did that as a way to grow. Never thought about it before. And when they heard it, they said, yeah, I can double my giving 1 month a year. I gave you the $20 a week thing. I've had people double, triple, quadruple their giving, growing by 1% a year and never stopping, including a planned gift to the congregation. There are plenty of ways to grow in generosity, and once we model it, people will start to see themselves in that modeling and can live into it. So, oh, great. And yet, I see there's a great comment in the chat about young people are generous. Don't wait till they're 80 to ask for a gift. I had a whole congregation led to generosity because of the generosity of a high schooler. She said, folks, I'm going to give up a Coke a week, which was, I don't know, at the time, $1.25. So she was going to give $60, $70 to the congregation. And her parents had to increase their gift after that because it turned out she was out giving them. So don't deny a generation the opportunity to give. Generations are stimulated to giving differently. But at the same time, everybody has capacity for generosity. I do get upset when I hear that, one generation isn't generous. That's actually not true. There are people within every generation that are incredibly generous. There are people within every generation who aren't. And so I'm delighted for that comment to show up there. So best practices in the stewardship process. Tell outcome stories all year. Tell generosity stories all year. That's your year-round program. It might happen that year-round you have a special appeal or you have to raise money to send the kids to the National Youth Gathering. By the way, that doesn't take 50 weeks. It takes about 6 weeks to raise, whether you're raising $6,000 or $600,000, it takes about 6 weeks to inform, to motivate, to ask, and to thank. And it's important that those special fundraisers don't reinforce a scarcity mentality, that they also assume abundance. Real quick, if you're doing a breakfast or something, back when we can meet in person for National Youth Gathering fundraising or sending kids to camp or whatever it is, and you have a meal, have somebody pay for the meal ahead of time so that nobody feels like the gift they need to give is to cover the meal. What they need to do is give gifts to enable the ministry to happen. And it's about the impacts of the ministry that are going to happen. So anyway, other best practices: have a strategic plan, have a strategic goal that you're working towards that people can rally behind, and not just the tactic. Make sure you inform, inspire, ask, and thank. Make sure you connect spirituality and giving, and then, and with that, it's mentoring, it's telling stories, it's telling how God's active in your life, and how that's growing and helping you grow in your discipleship and your spirituality. People are people. They're not all the same. Differentiate, segment, treat people differently. And especially as you're holding accountable, and don't accidentally say, hey, all of you are behind in your giving, because all of you probably aren't behind in your giving. Some people might be, while others have grown in generosity. Those that grew in their generosity, if they hear that everybody's behind, they're going to be a little demotivated because of that. And then as we are investing, as we're seeking more money, we're making sure that that connection to how it is we're expanding our mission and vision, how we're making a difference in the kingdom of God is taking place. So I'm going to back up there. Let's do some questions. And then if we get through the questions, I've got another video, but the video will be optional based on how we do with questions. So a congregation has a project that's influencing the community, and some community members are making gifts. Fantastic. So a couple things with opportunities that pass beyond just the local. That's great to invite people in. Remember, if Matthew 6:21, where your treasure is, your heart will be. As they make a gift to that ministry, you're getting a bit of their heart. So I don't know that I'd start asking necessarily for money for the congregation itself, but use that as the entree to engage in conversation about the other things that the congregation is doing. I would probably focus on, let's say you got a $100 gift to this outside ministry. Seek to grow those gifts to the outside ministry more than the congregation, but recognize your opportunity to engage them for what the congregational ministry is about and kind of go from there. You have a stronger case for outside support, by the way, the more generous the congregational members are. Grant funders in America won't fund unless the entire governing board is being generous. And the same is true of people outside your congregation funding you. They'll be more generous as your congregation is being more generous. Don't look at them as giving so the congregation doesn't have to. So are there resources for strategic planning? Most DEMs in the ELCA synods can help with that. That's something our firm does walk people through. Board Source, by the way, is also just a fantastic resource. Board Source, you can Google it and find it. All kinds of books and other things. There's some old Alban Institute stuff on strategic planning that I find very helpful. And you can find people within your congregation who can help with strategic planning because they do it at work. The things ahead of time that you really need to work from are you need to work through the identity piece before you get a corporate person leading the strategic planning. So just make sure that the identity piece is centered in who you really are. That's probably a great place for Synod resource people to help you with that identity portion. And then local folks could maybe help you with the action planning, or they can help you with the whole thing. I'm happy to keep folks like John Wirtz and Rick and other people just really busy. So feel free to do that. Someone tried the discount code Ward 30. There's no space between Ward and 30. That might have been it. If you still have problems, just call them and they'll honor it. I promise. And I'll see what I can do to get the code fixed on the book if that problem persists. So Ward, WARD 30, no space. And I know they'll honor it verbally on the phone. It wasn't supposed to expire yet, so let's see if that works. hey, we cleared the questions. So I put together one other video. I call it kind of a best practices outcomes video from some folks that have engaged. We have a program called Stewardship for All Seasons, which is our program that we look. Our goal in that program is that it changes culture within the congregation, that things actually change. And so we put this little video together. It's just a couple of minutes, and we got a moment for it. So Neil, let's play best practices, and then we'll come back and close up this session.
Each year we try to increase our giving as we're able, but in the past year, I've really seen the value add that our support for the church yields. I've learned that giving to the church is not transactional. Our church can take $1 and add so much more value to that in terms of programming and outreach and community service and worship than anything a plain dollar could ever do. Well, it's a gradual process. I think the introspection involved gets stronger each year. I know that people appreciate hearing from our church, and not just what we need in terms of physical needs and dollars, but what we plan to do, and how each person is engaged in the life of the church.
The quality of the communication and the way the communication is structured, that really sends kind of that multi-layered message that we want to get out to the congregation, not just about dollars, but then how dollars tie to mission, and really to be much more missional focused. And I think that's been the real value that I've seen in the last 2 years with the program. And I think other people have too. I've heard a lot of really positive feedback.
So we were able to accomplish an increase in our overall giving of about 16% on a base of $700,000 by focusing clearly and definitively on those parts of our mission initiatives that were important to us. Rostered leaders simply need to be involved, they need to be committed, they need to spend time, they need to ask people. Certainly, the mantra that I use is, if you don't ask, they can't say yes.
The results we received are changing the footprint and the generosity in our congregation. We have had so many ways that it's opened up the conversation, some of those tough conversations about generosity, about giving. And I am seeing how small changes are making a really big difference. The results that we experienced, I just want to have the joy of sharing with you. We had an additional 29 pledgers, if I'm doing the math right, and an additional $73,000 in pledged giving. After many years of some challenging transition and a congregation that wasn't very comfortable about talking about money, I can really see that we're making great headway, including 51 brand new pledging people. And so it's that spirituality of fundraising.
But more than the money and the pledges that have been generated, it's the impact that it's had on the spiritual life of our congregation. Commitment to the principles that are part of the Stewardship for All Seasons program have led for us to an increase in enthusiasm for our mission, excitement in giving, and a commitment to participation.
It used to be almost entirely on the backs of pastors to be leading the way when it came to a stewardship appeal, but now we have a whole group of people doing this. And it's not something that takes place just for that one part of the year. Now this is a year-long effort, truly having stewardship for all seasons.
For you is let you know that this culture change that I've been talking about is possible. I think the earlier panel discussion we had, as well as some of the stories you just heard there, and there are lay people out there like Gary Philpy who do believe that if we don't ask, they can't say yes, and they'll be happy to be your partner in that, in making that happen. So as I look at the clock, I've got just a couple minutes before we need to wrap this up. We'll take a quick break before we have another panel discussion. and then we'll conclude with any other follow-up questions and things that you have. The question of should a pastor know really is probably the one I get most often, and that causes anxiety. There's a chapter in the book about this. Chapter 16 fully dives into, should a pastor know? And I don't think you can adequately care for people not knowing. I don't think you can lead people not knowing what resources are available. I just think it hamstrings our ability to lead far too much. And honestly, I think it gives money too much power. Would it be the first thing I changed when I went into a congregation? Probably not, because it's a topic that, when you talk about money, you need some trust. At the same time, are there some practices I might just accidentally do to see how things go, like signing the first, quarter statement, and getting that out there. There's a congregation here in South Carolina that did use my book as a book study, and discovered and discerned that it was at least a good thing to explore and give opportunity to. And they actually this year gave people the opportunity on their intent form to check if they wanted the pastors to know, or at least were willing for the pastors to know. And about a third of the congregation said yes, and which is allowing the pastors now to be able to tell generosity stories. But even more impactful than that, their council president said, this whole discussion has really enabled me and my family to have conversations regarding money in our lives and generosity. And it was something that we had never explored because we weren't really allowed to talk about it. But it opened up conversations, and it is now part of our spiritual journey. And people need to be led there. And I guess the final thing I would say about this is, when we worry about whether the pastor should know, we oftentimes don't ask the question, are there, we usually worry, are there people that will get mad if the pastor knows? Will that upset anyone? But we never really ask the question, is there anybody that would be mad and upset if the pastor doesn't know and isn't able to express gratitude, which Tom mentioned in his video? The gratitude calls maybe not, necessarily, but they are a nice touch, and they do help and motivate for the future. So it's an issue that it does need tenderness. It shouldn't be paralyzing, though. Money should not be that important that it paralyzes our ministries. And so it is something to explore. And anyway, so I'm going to kind of leave that there.